Just a pleasure to be here and happy to see all of you. Ben?
Hey everybody, Ben Maritz with Great Expectations. We're an affordable housing developer and property manager here in Seattle. We've been a friend of the social housing group. Really been inspired by what they've been doing, and happy to discuss it here with you today. With that, I'll introduce Tiffani, who has been instrumental in bringing social housing to Seattle. She's done her background is, I'll let her introduce herself, but she came from Real Change and then started an advocacy organization that ran the campaigns for social housing and did so with a lot of resilience, both in terms of resistance from people that didn't understand what it was, did a lot of great education work, resisted a lot of friendly advice, including for me. She did not accept my guidance on a marketing slogan of social housing for an anti-social city. But despite that, was able to get some really great results. And so we will hand it over to Tiffani.
Thank you, Ben, and good afternoon, everyone. I am really appreciative of being here. Thank you to AHW for showcasing social housing during Affordable Housing Week. It really does mean a lot. I am Tiffani McCoy, she, her pronouns. I am the co-executive director of House Our Neighbors. I want to be really clear from the top that I only speak for House Our Neighbors. I only speak for the campaigns that we won. I'm not for the social housing developer. That's what Roberto is here for. Now, I could use my time today to talk about who is House Our Neighbors and how did we get to the place where now we have two voter-backed initiatives to create a social housing developer as well as to fund it. But I'm sure that a lot of you in this room already know that story and that you already know the makeup of the group who started this coalition, which is now its own independent organization with me. So I'd like to spend my time today talking about the campaign, specifically the one that we just won, Proposition 1A, as well as the successes and hopes that we have for social housing here in Seattle and beyond. So as most of you know, on February 11th, Seattle voters cast their ballots for a first in the nation initiative that taxes the wealthiest corporations in Seattle to fund the Seattle social housing developer at a tune of roughly $50 million a year. By the end of the Prop 1A campaign, the coalition garnered nearly 600 individual volunteers who attended at least one of our campaign events for Prop 1A. That's either from signature gathering all the way to getting out the vote for Prop 1A. Our coalition knocked 45,000 doors during the get out the vote period of 6 weeks, which is really remarkable. We made 62,371 phone calls. We texted 89,226 people, and we did one round of citywide mailers. I'm sure you all know this, but I think it is really important to just restate and ground ourselves in the fact that we live in a region that wants to invest more money in affordable and social housing. As you all know, thanks to the work of HDC and partners, the housing levy in November 2023 passed by a 66.5% margin. And then in February 2025, Prop 1A passed with 63% of the vote. Voters in our region are hungry for bold policy solutions, and they will vote for them if they are given the chance. 40% of the people that we door knocked on did not vote in the previous February special election. But we still knocked on their doors because they voted in February 2023 to establish the social housing developer. We knew that even these low propensity voters would cast a ballot to fund social housing if given the chance. And we took time out of our strategy to make sure to knock on those doors to turn those people out to vote. And they did. I think that the margin of the Prop 1A victory shows that voters not only want social housing and want it now, is that they also want significant investments in social housing and a dedicated revenue source. It also shows the broad support for the housing model that we created with community members ourselves, in addition to reiterating their support for the governance structure that was established by I-135 in February of 2023. Now, we have a mass base of social housing supporters here in Seattle and beyond who want to fight to ensure its success. Since the February election, only 3 months ago, we, House Our Neighbors, have been asked to present on our campaigns and/or our vision for a social housing future to over 13 unique jurisdictions in the United States, and some even here in Washington State. We are beginning our social housing roadshow, is what we're calling it, to discuss this housing model to different parts of King County, starting in Redmond in June. And the organization that I co-lead has also rejoined the steering committee of the Complete Communities Coalition, which is led by your very own HDC and FutureWise, to ensure that that social housing can be developed across our city, and that we make land use changes that will ensure the success of that in our next comprehensive plan. With the existential threats of the Trump regime to critical affordable housing programs and dollars, and the redirection of jumpstart dollars from affordable housing at the local level, we need to be doing everything in our power to make massive, dedicated investments at the city, county, and state level. We need to get rid of exclusionary zoning, and we need to incentivize affordable and social housing development throughout our city, in addition to employing broad-reaching anti-displacement strategies. Again, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we've created here in Seattle, and I look forward to hearing what Roberto will talk about their vision to carry out the charter that voters passed. And I'm happy to answer any questions and just welcome everyone to get involved in the social housing movement here in Seattle, get involved with the social housing developer, get involved in changing the comprehensive plan to end exclusionary zoning, and just staying in tune and involved. So thank you, Ben and Marta and HTC.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, because your work makes it so clear that you know, we too can make change. So I just want to give you your kudos and your team kudos, because that's a lot of hard work and dedication. And I witnessed some of that, myself firsthand. So really proud to call you a colleague and an amazing advocate. And yeah, so at this time, I would just like to encourage those of you that have any questions to go ahead and put them in the chat. And while you get an opportunity to do that, I'd just love to pose a question, Tiffany. Do you feel like there's been a paradigm shift in Seattle, particularly on the left, away from anti-development tendencies towards recognizing the need for new housing to keep people in their neighborhoods, and also why and how?
It's a really good question, especially given how much I touched on the comprehensive plan. And I think that it's both. I think that, yes, there maybe has been a paradigm shift, but I would say that I think it's always that sentiment has always been among the population, but they haven't had an avenue to realize it. What social housing provide, what the economic model that voters created, a social housing developer that is publicly owned in perpetuity, that is permanently affordable, that is rid of market speculation and available to all, that can actually go into newly upzoned areas of the city and capture some of that wealth for the public benefit. We have not had that on a grand scale in the city of Seattle. So when voters are asked, do you want to do an upzone? Indirectly, it's most likely going to be going to private developers who are going to make a lot of money off of those upzones. I think the answer has been a mixture of no. But I think now, because we do have this public developer that is going to be investing in this public infrastructure through the social housing developer, we are starting to see folks that are bordering on the NIMBY side, maybe bordering more on the public housing in my backyard only side, but also folks that are on the left that maybe have been anti-development, who are now wanting to get involved in changing the comprehensive plan to allow for affordable and social housing, because for the first time we have an agency that has the funds to make a significant difference to make sure that that capture is in the public interest, not just in the private developer interests.
Great.
So we're looking at how, first of all, thank you. But again, I want to encourage anyone, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We want to make sure that all of your answers are getting questions are getting answered.
I can ask a
And
question, Marta.
you have one? Go ahead.
Yeah. So Tiffany knows, I think many people are in awe at the success of the campaign, in part because it really did sidestep a lot of what the typical Seattle process looks like for bringing new ideas into the city. Obviously, as a result, some feathers were ruffled. How is the movement for social housing working to you know, build bridges with the various other players in the city and try and build support now among the institutions now that the voters have made so clear what their intentions are?
Great question, Ben. I would say one of the first things that we set out to do from the beginning that I believe we've upheld, and I hope you all feel that we've upheld, is the integrity of our movement. When we set out from the beginning and we said that we live in one of the wealthiest cities in the world, that there is enough money here to fund social housing and affordable housing, and that the social housing movement would not be going after dollars that are set aside for affordable housing, and that we have upheld that promise, I think speaks for itself. And I believe and hope that that has helped to quell some of those feathers being ruffled, because we showed not only with I-135 mandating that the money that went to the social housing developer for in-kind support could not come from affordable housing pots of money. That's explicitly stated in the charter of I-135. So that's example one. Example two is when we went out to seek our own revenue source for social housing, we created a whole new revenue system for social housing. We did not go after Jumpstart or housing levy or anything else. We said that we were going to do that from the beginning. We fulfilled that promise. And then I think to actually have it be the elected officials of the city to be the ones that actually wanted to go after affordable housing dollars to fund the social housing developer through Proposition 1B, again, just showed our integrity in our commitment to not going after those dollars. And it was actually the elected officials that wanted to do that. So I think that's a big one, Ben. We've always tried to be really true to our values and to that integrity. I think having Roberto here as someone who is has all of the wealth of experience and knowledge, helping to quell those feathers and to build those bridges has been instrumental and will continue to be. But as I hope folks know, if not, I'm going to say it now, we're always open to conversations. I've had lots of conversations with folks who have been upset about the approach that House Our Neighbors has taken. I can say very clearly that I take full responsibility for that, and I wouldn't have changed the way that we went about it. But I still think it's important for us to open up those lines of communication and discussion so that we can build together in the future, especially with the Trump regime doing what it is to all of our neighbors across the board. This is the time to join forces and work in tandem together.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I just want to move us to some of the questions in the chat. Patrick asks, how long do you think it will be before we start seeing folks moving into social housing?
I would say by the end of this year, but that's definitely more of a Roberto question because I'm not on the board of the social housing developer.
Okay, we will circle back. And from David, what opportunities does the county have in expanding social and affordable housing? Are there key asks for the county executive race in November?
Yeah, I think that, Councilmember Zahalai's workforce housing initiative, we're still waiting to get the report back on that. And I think that has a lot of hope in it. That's focused on providing workforce housing just through bonding. We went a different route in Seattle on purpose. We wanted to have a long-standing revenue source dedicated to the social housing developer, in addition to the ability to bond in the future once it becomes not risky on the bond market, because we know that we are in a deep housing crisis and we wanted to have both funding mechanisms there to accelerate the acquisition and the construction of social housing here in our city. So looking forward to hearing the results of that. Hope that it does allow for folks that are in the middle income to be able to also live in that housing and cross-subsidize those at the lower end. But I think also just making sure to follow the Complete Communities Coalition and making sure that we're also expanding land use opportunities and incentives for affordable and social housing here in our region.
To follow up on that, there was a question about social housing campaigns. What can affordable housing advocates learn from the House Our Neighbors campaign?
I mean, I think that No, I'm not trying to be modest that I'm not saying that we don't have anything to offer, because I mean, you all just won this historic victory with the housing levy in 2023. I think that what we're just seeing through Prop 1A is that I think people want to spend more money, significantly more money. And also, if you provide voters with a vision of a Seattle that is affordable to all, they're going to get behind that if you engage them and you bring them into that movement. So, we took a more outside strategy, as Ben said. We went directly to the voters. We didn't work just directly with those who are empowered now. So I think that just making sure to not always just go by the guidelines of what elected officials say is possible. Always be tapping into the people, into like all of your mini networks. I mean, HDC is a giant organization. Like, make sure you have that power. Like, affordable housing developers have that power, and how can we work together to achieve all of those goals, especially given the federal situation the way it is.
So, are there social and affordable housing you are referring to? So, with this project, are there any associated tax credits?
Again, just speaking for House Our Neighbors as the folks that drafted and passed the initiatives, we did not see a need to utilize tax credits. Whatever the social housing developer decides will be there in the future, but because of the inherent cross-subsidy model of social housing, how we set it up here in Seattle, where you have higher income tenants subsidizing the rents of those at the lower income, we do not see a need for it. But again, I kind of might ping that back for Roberto in the future as they're doing their own modeling internally of what will work given the macroeconomic situation at the time.
Ben, I just wanted to ask if you had any questions before
Yeah,
I move us right along.
sure. I have lots of questions.
Feel free, jump in.
I'm interested in the broader social housing movement nationwide, which I think started off in Montgomery County, as far as I know, and Seattle really took the torch in having these initiatives passed. Are you connected to other groups around the country that are looking at Seattle's model or doing other interesting things that you think will change the national housing landscape?
Yes, we are. We've, like I said in my just brief remarks, been in contact with 13 different individual jurisdictions across the country. I was just on a call this week with folks in Spokane. Roberto and I were just down in Glendale, California last week or the week before that, talking with folks there. And I'm also in conversation with council members and activists in Portland as well. And I'm sure, Roberto, you probably are as well. So I think that there is a lot of excitement and momentum around what we did in Seattle, especially given the federal government where it's at right now. And I think that we will be seeing a lot of activity actually in our own state. Like I said, we're going to Redmond in June. We're in conversations with people in Bellingham and Spokane and Tukwila. We are looking to expand and have these road shows across the state. We've also actually been talking to folks in Tacoma. This is our goal in the long run, is to see social housing also at the state level. So I think that also, given the Trump regime and the threats to the low-income housing tax credit, to Section 8 and project-based vouchers, that this is a political opportunity for jurisdictions to look at how to Trump-proof themselves in their affordable housing sectors away from the incongruity of the federal government, if you will.
Question here from Kyler, which is like a really good one that I'll just read out. Can you speak to how you built the House Our Neighbors Coalition from the beginning and what inspired it?
Yeah, so as you said, Ben, at the beginning, I used to work at Real Change. I'm sure everyone knows who Real Change is, but in case you don't, it is a low barrier employment opportunity for folks here in Seattle. It's a street paper. I worked there as the advocacy director for just about 7 years, and this coalition came out of my work there in 2021 when folks put together the Compassion Seattle Charter Amendment, Amendment 29, that would have done some things, but also would have enshrined encampment sweeps as a cornerstone of our homelessness policy. And given my positionality at Real Change, given the fact that we were part of 2 lawsuits against the city to end the sweeps and to actually invest in services for folks, when this came out, it was really a no-brainer to organize against it. Arguably, our city does already employ encampment sweeps as a cornerstone of our homelessness policy, but we did not want that in the charter. So from that, in the defeat of that charter amendment from even making it to the ballot, we went on to the offensive, and we wanted to provide our vision for what Seattle could look like if we invested in housing as a public good, as a human right, and that's where social housing came out of. So the folks that started this coalition with me, the vast majority are still serving on our steering committee. We have 2 boards now because we are a 501c3 and C4, but that's really where the social housing movement was born out of. It was in opposition to sweeps and for a future where we actually invest in the infrastructure needed to not need to have sweeps.
Yeah, I mean, I was really inspired how the House Our Neighbors Coalition took what was, a wouldn't say it's a negative campaign, but it was a no on Compassion Seattle campaign, was successful there and didn't stop, right? It wasn't like, oh, we just stopped this. How your ability to translate that into positive movement on a solution that obviously resonated with many people is really, really inspiring. And for me as an outsider is really the lesson to take away from this. There's so many, it's so easy to block stuff. There's so many things that you can do to stop things. It's really hard to build something new. And I really commend you and your group for having done that.
Thank you, Ben.
So if there's any other questions, that I'm sure we can come back to you, and maybe Roberto will pitch things back to you as well on the political side, which is totally fine. But I think now we can turn it over to Roberto for a few comments as the CEO of the Seattle Social Housing Developer. Roberto is new to our community here in Seattle, but is not new to affordable housing, having done many different things over his career, including doing USDA rural development in Oregon, which, if any of you are familiar with the tax credit program, you know it's very complicated. The USDA program makes that look like a walk in the park. But Roberto, I'll let you run through your bio as well as talk about the SSHD in the future.
Thanks. So I haven't had a chance to meet most of you, but one of the first things I did when I got to Seattle Social Housing was start talking with my board about how we need to be part of the affordable housing landscape that exists in Seattle. And we are part of this broader system, and we're not parallel to it. We want to be additive. I've said that before. As Tiffany pointed out, the charter was very clear in spelling out that we were not going to utilize the sources that affordable housing developers rely on. We wanted to create a new source, or HON did through the charter, and that stands true. I don't think we'll be using tax credits, and as much as is possible, we won't be using other public sources. The backup sec. I come from 20 years in affordable housing, as been commented. I was in Oregon and doing farm worker housing. I come from a farm worker family. My dad and my uncles were farm workers and experienced a lot of housing instability, as did I growing up. And figured that when you have housing stability, really incredible things become possible, and all kinds of talents that people don't get to utilize and put to use in our communities can come forth. And that's been my personal experience, and I've seen it over and over in affordable housing. I then, after 10 years of rural and farm worker housing, went to California to do, it was supposed to be more farm worker housing, but I ended up in Sacramento doing a much more urban, dense housing, and took over a 35-year-old agency that was arguably one of the least productive affordable developers in California. And we were able to turn that around within 5 years. We became one of the top 5 most productive developers. And by the time I left after 7+ years, we had reached number 3. So I think incredible things are possible. I think that the frustrating part for me was we were doing everything we possibly could, to develop more housing and address the homeless situation in the capital region. And as much housing as we built, the problem continued to get worse. And that was because of the number of people falling into homelessness. And I kept wondering, there's got to be a way to stop this from happening. We can't just attack the problem. We have to attack what's causing the problem. And so I was approached about social housing and was rather skeptical, but then I got to go to Vienna and spend a week studying there, and it was inspiring. And what I saw were people, both practitioners and the residents, who just had a deep belief in the model. And when I got to talk to them, they said the right things. And I came back and gave up my job in California to come to Seattle to help launch Seattle Social Housing. And part of that inspiration was, how's our neighbors? And this citizen movement to make affordable housing a primary issue with the voters is really inspiring. And I wanted to be part of that. And so here I am. I've been here since September, and we just completed our strategic plan. We haven't put it out yet. We're now working on financial projections related to the plan, and then we'll be rolling that out publicly over the next few months. We are actually actively looking at feasibility of a number of properties, and more are coming forth, and we're going to be talking to more and more of you and engaging people and talking about what's possible and where does collaboration happen and what's our right role in relation to the rest of the affordable housing industry here in Seattle. So I look forward to talking to you about much more of that. So
Thank you so much, Roberto.
Sorry, I was on mute. We can circle back to some other questions from the group earlier. So the first one was, how long do you think it will be before we start seeing people move into social housing?
It could be very quickly. There's one property at least that we're analyzing. The acquisition, in theory, could take place this year. Our goal is to get one property under contract this year. We're focusing on acquisitions, and hopefully not initially acquisition rehabs, but acquisitions of underperforming properties that are already built. Not wanting to immediately launch into construction yet, though that is the long-term goal. That's where we'd really like to be and where we think we could have the biggest impact overall. But removing market rate properties from speculation. So if we're acquiring early, that's what we're focused on. And there is an acquisition rehab that we're looking at that we're very excited about. And so there's two properties which we've run numbers on, which look very feasible. So I would say, early next year, second quarter of next year, we should probably have a property and have people housed.
Awesome. The question here around just the size of properties for social housing, specifically around 4plexes and 6plexes, but maybe I'll broaden that up to just ask, what are the types of properties that you think would be a good fit for the social housing model?
Yeah, initially we were looking at smaller rental housing properties, a proof of concept. And so we were looking at properties that are, 10 to 20 units just to prove out the model. And then we were approached about some larger properties, so 40 to 60 units, and started looking at those. But those were not properties that, they weren't built yet, so they were properties we would have to build, and that was not ideal. Then we got approached about larger properties. And so the two that we're looking at are one's 150 units, and the other is 300 plus units. And that for the moment, that seems to be where we've landed. They look feasible, and we could have pretty deep impact with properties that size. I do think in the future, we will get back to some smaller properties, particularly urban infill. A lot of times that's hard to do for affordable developers. The investors want larger properties, and we can go into neighborhoods and develop smaller. And there is interest in really looking at whether we can do co-op or home ownership, but that's somewhere down the road, and that's not in our strategic plan at this point.
A question, there's a question here on the how people can be involved with the SSHD. Many interested supporters on this call. Anything that to get involved, from employment opportunities, volunteer, further advocacy. You know, what does the SSHD need from its supporters at this point?
Yeah, we're working with the city now on getting an interfund loan and making positive progress, and that will deliver the funds for us to be able to start hiring. So you can watch our website. We'll be posting those positions shortly, hopefully next month. We'll start in on that. In terms of volunteerism or engagement, at this point, Han is leading the advocacy work. And I'm the only staff person over here, so there's not a lot of capacity yet to do much. But there will be. And I think once we have 4 or 5 staff, then we can start to actually build out the department. So there's a lot of infrastructure work to do. And there's a lot of engagement work to do. And we're just at the front end of beginning to think about, what does that engagement look like? Where is the engagement with the supporters that have been? How do we maintain that? Where does the engagement happen more with HTC and the affordable developers and all the folks, the other organizations who supported Han's work? So I think engagement is going to be a fairly large piece of work for us, but we're still building out that strategy.
Tiffany, do you want to jump in on that?
Yep, I know, perennial issue with Zoom. I would say I'll grab our I'll grab Han's newsletter and post the link into the chat. I believe also that I have some folks here from Han. If you want to do that in the chat, more power to you. But that is a way, like on the advocacy side, to stay involved and to help work. Like I said, we're getting involved again in the comprehensive plan. We're also looking at different ways to de-risk social housing development, making sure that social housing also has the ability to not have to go through design review, for instance, and other ways that affordable housing and social housing are slowed in the process. So that's a good way to plug in and to stay involved. Thank you, Ben Furlow and Nisheen, for putting that in the chat. So I would stay in touch with that. We have a couple state bills that we're also looking at next session as well. So if it's advocacy, you can definitely plug into our newsletter, and happy to loop you in and have you be part of that push.
Great. So there's a question here around funding timelines, collections of taxes. And you mentioned a little bit about the interfund loan. Maybe we can broaden that up. Can you tell us a little bit about the funding process, how the tax is being assessed, when it will be collected, and when you'll receive it, and then what's the plan in the interim?
Yeah. So the tax in this case is a little different than the jumpstart tax. This is a compensation tax, so it has to analyze total compensation. And the city is still working through that, and they have acquired or about to acquire a new module to assist them in the process. They're not going to be able to assess the tax until the 4th quarter of the year, and it'll be collected in the month of January and start to be dispersed in the end of January or early February. And so we'll get all of the 2025 tax revenue in one lump sum. which will really help jumpstart the work and allow us to do acquisitions and not have to build up the balance sheet in this slow way, but able to actually go out and take out debt to do those acquisitions. And then the revenue from there forward will flow in quarterly. Within about, I think it's going to take about 5 years to establish our ability and our capacity to issue bonds. But once we can do that, the goal is to build a substantial revolving loan fund. And the primary basis of the model for social housing is that very large, substantial revolving loan fund. That's how all of the social housing models are developed. And then there are the human aspects and the design and programming parallel to that. But that's the goal, is to get to the issuance of bonds and establishing that fund. And then we're less reliant on capricious markets and lenders and investors and fluctuating interest rates.
So, I've got a question from Kyler. Besides the mixed income model, how much do you think the social housing developer will focus on housing innovations like offsite construction?
I think innovation is going to be a little easier for us than it may be has been when I was working in affordable housing. And so in part because as affordable developers, we're so dependent on developer fee that we don't have much time to do innovation, and we can't carry the debt and taxes on those parcels for a long time. So you're chasing the funding sources and trying to cobble those together and get out from under. So you're not spending all your developer fee on those deals. In this case, we will have some unrestricted money, and so we won't be as heavily reliant on developer fee. And it should help us to be able to extend some timelines, to be able to plan innovation in a more orderly way, and then implement it. We'll see if that turns out to be true. But I think some of the innovation is already written into the charter, and passive house is one of those things. We're talking about mass timber, and I think we're going to create a position internally to really focus on a lot of this innovation and design work. And that's really exciting. And I know that's kind of dreamy in the affordable housing world to be able to have the resources to do that. We'll see if we can, but we'd really like to. And we'd really like to support innovation in Seattle and within the industry and see how we can partner and help leverage that with the rest of you.
That's really beautiful. Thank you. We have a question here from Ben Furlow. What barriers are there in the short term for getting a social housing developer access to public lands, and what long-term policy changes would be most beneficial?
Yeah. You know, so public lands are good. We are looking at that and thinking about how can we land bank. Since we're not in an immediate rush to develop, we don't have to focus on that quickly. But if, for example, if we were to have an automatic tax exemption, we don't, but if we did, then land banking would be much easier. And this is a big part of the program in Vienna for how they manage to control development. And they land bank, and the planning timelines for those large parcels, 20, 30, 40 acres or more, can be 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And so it's a very much more orderly process. I'd love to see something happen like that here. And I think if that can happen, then again, there's potential for collaboration across the industry. I'm not talking about the social housing developer controlling all that land or developing all that land. I'm talking about how do we remove some land from speculation and allow all of us to have access to it and have a more orderly process for developing that land, which takes some of the pressure potentially off of, excuse me, off of the social housing developer to have to develop all of that because you all have so much capacity already, and also helps take some of the pressure off affordable developers from chasing individual single parcels piece by piece, year by year, and trying to get those developed. So that's the long-term vision, I would say, is really getting to access public land and nail that in.
If I can, I'm going to jump on this point too, because this is a critical component, as Roberto said, and social housing internationally. Singapore is another excellent example, specifically just for housing and the public capture of public lands. So much so that in Initiative 135 that created the social housing developer, if you look at the text, Section 13 lays out a feasibility study that must be done by the city anytime that public land is sold for a non-public purpose. I will just flag for folks here, because I'm assuming you're all here because you're supportive or on the spectrum of supportive. But I do just want to plug that I'm not sure that that section has been actually fulfilled by the executive or by the city council. We've been trying to figure out if the feasibility study practice is actually employed, and we have not gotten a solid answer from that. But just want to flag that for you all. We did put that in there just so that the city has to go on record if it is selling public land to private purposes, like we saw with the Mercer Mega Block a couple of years ago, if you all will remember. And then secondly, yeah, public land is a huge issue. I mean, our beloved late Representative Frank Chops, the Hope and Home Project is a huge thing, dear to our hearts, dear to a lot of people in this room. There was a lot of discussion between Han and also the SSHD and Frank about the Home and Hope project. So hope to see some of that potentially coming online in the future too. And as Roberto said, making sure that land banking is a possibility for social housing, but also for affordable housing in the future at the state level as well. We need to be capturing these public access assets and keeping them in the public sphere.
Thank you. I'm going to move us to our next question. Coming from Max in the chat, are residents going to be charged 30% of their rent similar to the housing choice voucher, or 30% of their income target more similar to LIHTC housing?
The former, not the latter, is the goal. We're trying to remove their incomes from the equation, except at initial qualification, and really focus on the building and the cash flow of the building. So if the building is cash flowing, then we shouldn't have to raise rents so high or so often. And if people are not, if the rents and the increases are not based on salaries and incomes, then in theory, people have more money to spend. And that's stimulating the economy. And that was one of the things that really inspired me in Vienna when I was talking with a senior who, we asked her, how's your housing? And she said, it's great. I love it. And if I lived in your country, I know I wouldn't have access to something like this. But I live on fixed income, and I can walk every day to my local newsstand and buy a newspaper. And then I can walk to my local coffee shop and spend a couple hours reading my newspaper and drinking my coffee. And I know I'm a productive part of the economy, and I'm welcome, right? And that's a feeling that I think people don't get a lot when they're on fixed income, is that they're welcome and they're a productive part of the economy. But everybody's contributing, right? And we all want that.
Agreed. And from either of your point of view, what opportunities are there for collaboration between existing affordable housing organizations and the social housing developer? How can HDC members partner in a way that's mutually beneficial?
Maybe Tiffani, you can speak to that around engagement or advocacy.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, I mean, an example that we've touched on a couple times here is that House Our Neighbors is on the steering committee of the Housing Development Consortiums, and FutureWise is Complete Communities Coalition. So we're working in a very big tent, a lot of different interest for a land use update that actually centers the needs of people, that centers a pro-housing agenda, that makes sure that there are strong incentives for affordable and social housing in newly upzoned areas. So that's a huge one. The fact that we're part of Affordable Housing Week here today, I think, is another huge show of bridges being built, of partnerships that are being laid for the long term. And yeah, I know that there are potentially discussions happening about different levies or revenue sources for affordable housing at different levels of government, and House Our Neighbors would be completely supportive of those and plug in wherever we can. So as I said, like a lot of this is couched right now for me under what's happening at the federal level, and we need to be working together as much as we possibly can to make sure that our folks that are not able to compete with software engineers on the rental housing market are able to continue to live in the city, that we have educators and students that are able to continue living in the city, that we have enough space for our low-income residents to stay in their tent cities, to stay in their tiny house villages, and then to also have opportunities for them to transition out of those into housing that is affordable to them and really high quality.
I would say I recognize the looming challenges from the federal level, and that the administration is taking target on Washington and Seattle and the Northwest, and the talk of more cuts with HUD is putting people, organizations, affordable housers in ever more difficult places. And we don't have the solution over here at Seattle Social Housing, and wouldn't want to craft a solution without engaging the industry anyway. The resources we have are limited, but we are actually having a lot of conversation internally at our board about what's our role in relation to all of this. We don't want to see more people become homeless. We don't want to see the nonprofits or other affordable housers destabilized. And that's a real risk. And we realize who that impacts ultimately. Well, it impacts everybody. It impacts those living in the housing. It impacts those of you who work in affordable housing. It impacts the local economy. It puts more pressure on the city and the county for more resources to address the problem. So I would say we're thinking about it, we're talking about it, we're strategizing about how we can engage with you all to have productive conversation and see what we might be able to do. But I hope we can look at it holistically and not as what has started happening. People are coming to us with individual properties. Can you help us here? Right. And we want to, but we also have to have orderly process, and we have limited resources. So we're going to have to prioritize as well. And so we'll be reaching out to talk with more organizations about that as well.
So this is, I guess, kind of an opportunity to kind of dream big. Where do you see the organization in 10 years? And that question is going to be for both of you. And where do you see social housing in 10 years?
I want to be land banking a lot. And I want to have a really big revolving loan fund. And I want to see how we're going to continue to play a role. We're not flying parallel, right? I want to see how do we work together. And I have thoughts about that. And they're not in our strategic plan. And I need to talk with people about those things. But I do think there's a lot more potential. I think we will be building housing that is more in context with neighborhoods, so we can build some smaller deals. And more innovation will be happening. And I think that's mutually beneficial. And I know a bunch of you are further down the road on that than we certainly are, both in thinking and implementation. And so I think there's real potential for us there.
I would just want to build on some of the things that you're saying and some of the themes that are coming out of the questions. And I think it really touches on why I personally am so excited about this. We get a lot of questions here about, will it be like LIHTC, or will it, how will it tap other sources of funding? And these are all really good questions, based on what we all know as the housing landscape.
Right.
But the reality is here that we are building something very new with really a tremendous amount of flexibility. The charter sets some guardrails around mixed income and public ownership. But beyond that, there's a lot of details that still have to be worked out. And it really is going to fall only to the social housing developer and the people of Seattle that own it to be able to define that. And it's very clear to me in my role as a developer that there are a lot of problems in the housing landscape that the current tools that we have simply cannot fund. We have a lot to be proud of here. We've done a tremendous amount of work building PSH in the city. We're a real leader for it. I think despite all of our complaining about like permitting in Seattle, we actually built a ton of market rate apartments that are really good for people that are working in Amazon, and those people need housing, and it's great that they have so many great options. But there are specific constituencies, mostly people kind of moderate incomes, particularly people that have families that need bigger apartments, where there is no current solution to solve them. And we need to figure that out as a society to bring our city forward. And as a housing industry, a community of builders, property managers, architects, lawyers, we all need to be able to grow to meet the needs of the community that we're trying to serve. And we have the opportunity now to be at the ground floor of a national experiment as to how social housing will work in this specific American real estate context. So I think these questions are really great. I think it's totally understandable that we don't have the answers to all of them soon, but it's great to hear your commitment to solving those in partnership with the other members of our community here.
Yeah, I think if we can build more middle income housing, look, if you want to have a vibrant economy, you need a vibrant small business community. And if you're going to have a vibrant small business community, you need labor. And those are not high-paying jobs, but they're jobs, right? That help people survive. And they don't have access to housing. So how do we build housing for those people? Keep them from falling into homelessness. Keep you all from being overwhelmed, because I agree with you. Seattle has been a leader in addressing PSH. And you know how to do it, right? But the flood is too big. So how do we help ease some of that flood from flowing in? I think that's a role we can play. I also think that it's hard for us coming from affordable housing, and we're doing this internally. Julie Howe, one of my board members, who is an affordable developer for 25 years, we look at these properties and we start panicking because they're not appropriate for PSH. And then we have to go, wait a minute. Like, we may not have to do that here, right? We can house another population here. And we recognize that we are trained to think in this way from so many years of doing it. And Paul Williams at the Center for Public Enterprise said to me, he's like, when you think about these deals, think about a market rate deal, because this is a lot more like that. It's debt and it's equity than it is like an affordable deal. And if you go down that road, you're going to mix it all up and get confused and overcomplicate it. And so, like you said, Ben, it's the model is flexible, and it's that way by design. And so I think there's real rich potential in that.
So I think this is an opportunity for us to ask those that are present if you have any last or final questions. I think we have time for one more if anybody has a question. It seems that you've answered them all so thoroughly. Thank you. I did see that. Thank you,
Yeah.
Deepa, for calling that out. We didn't get to hear from you about the 10-year plan and the future of House Our Neighbors and the social housing developer.
Yeah, and again, speaking just from my positionality, looking forward to just building a really deep, trusting relationship with Roberto and the Social Housing Board that was created by voters. But yeah, in parallel to that, it's broadening social housing across our state. It's supporting people in other jurisdictions that are also looking to do this through an initiative or doing it through the council referring the social housing initiative to the voters instead of them having to go through the signature gathering process. It's looking at all of the different ways that social housing is excluded from being able to proliferate and to really capture a lot of the market. Roberto brought up Vienna earlier. You know, they have 50% of the population that is like living in social housing, 50 to 60%. That creates direct downward pressure on the private market and private market rents, where private developers are actually having to compete with the public sector for renters. You can imagine the effect that that has on not just like high quality, but also amenities, and then also the suppression of rents. This is a huge strategy to lowering rents in our city and to also creating communities where people can live forever. You know, we have this idea that you only live in a building for a couple of years and then you move to the next one. Like that does not have to be the reality. That's really upsetting for families, for kids that are in schools, for our elders that don't know whether or not they're going to continue to be able to live somewhere because maybe, unfortunately, the era that we're in capitalism, maybe a private equity firm is going to come in and buy up that retirement community and the land from below it. This is happening across the country. So instead of us continuing as a society to rely on the private market to meet one of our most basic fundamental human needs, we now have a public sector developer that is there to build housing for us forever. So there's ripple effects that are astounding for this, but we need to make sure that we continue to build the support from our local elected officials. I would say at this time, we have more deep support for social housing and what we're doing here in Seattle at the state level than we do here locally. And so you all are probably really connected with elected leaders here in Seattle and in the county. So reach out, put a bug in their ear, tell them to do whatever they can to pave the way for the social housing developer to be successful, to allow for the incentive of social housing in the comp plan, to get rid of design review. I mean, the list goes on. I'm happy to talk about this offline, but there are just so many tools that we need in order for social housing to be successful. Because right now, if we keep land use the way that it is, the social housing developer will be successful, no doubt about it, but it will not be as successful as it could be if we ended exclusionary zoning in the city. So stay involved, stay in tune. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this.
Monica, do
We-
I have time for one last comment?
Oh, go right ahead. I was just going to ask if you had any last thoughts, so
Yeah.
perfect timing.
No, Tiffany prompted it. I get used to talking like a developer, but the community development is really where my heart is. And my dream is of communities where people get to age in place and even multi-generationally families within a community. That's just not happening in urban areas these days. And I see it a lot here in Seattle, and I saw it when I lived, starting to happen in the 90s when I lived here. But I imagine people growing up in buildings where they know their neighbors multi-generationally, and those kids grow up and they know Mrs. Jones who lives down the hall, right? And they care for her and she relies on them. So really more holistic community building.
Mute, Mark.
You're muted.
I was muted and I lost the video. Thank you, Roberto and Tiffany, for taking the time to share with us and educate all of us here. We look forward to the future of the social housing developer. And again, we are always looking for ways to participate. I'd like to also thank Ben, my fellow co-host. And I just want to make sure I call everyone's attention to the chat where Kyler has been so kind to share the comp plan hearing. It's going to be on Monday. The details are listed. The remote public hearings at 9:30. In-person public hearing is at 4 p.m. Statements will be 1 minute. And Kyler, is there anything else that you'd like me to share?
No, thank you everyone for stepping up and making this a great Affordable Housing Week webinar. And thank you in case I don't see some of you who I've seen a bunch of times this week. Thanks for all of your involvement and attending all of these great events. It really shows how broad and deep of an ecosystem of affordable housing we have here. Besides for the Monday comp plan hearing, which we're going to really encourage people if you want to be there in person to get there very early. We need to get there ahead of some people that might not be as supportive of increasing housing capacity in our region. But there's also an event on Wednesday, which is a public hearing at the Daybreak Center in was that Discovery Park, right next to a planned development from the city of Seattle at Fort Lawton. They're proposing mixed income affordable housing at nearly free rate for public land. That's a huge development. There's a lot of there is opposition as well, and we need to make sure that our voices are heard as people who are fighting for more people to be able to live in the city and afford to. So thank you everyone for your continued involvement. Thanks Roberto and Tiffany for being here, and excited for all the next steps.
Thanks for having us.